what a pleasure to be talking to you today.
Hello, Wilmin. It's good to be here, albeit a bit frightening.
You or me, we can toss the dice to see who's the most frightening. Everyone, today I have the privilege to speak to Yuri Steyn. Yuri and me has worked together in Sasol years ago at R&D, but lately I had the pleasure to get to know Yuri even more on a personal level and then on a professional level. Yuri is the chairman of the OTC group, the Owner Team Consultation Group, leading us as consultants to really grow businesses of our clients. But today, our focus is to get to know Yuri as a person, Yuri's history, and where we are heading to. So I'm very excited to, with Yuri, share this journey with you today. Yuri, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yuri, many years at Sasol before you became a consultant. Tell me a little bit more about that journey.
I was very fortunate. In my matric year, I received a bursary from Sasol to go and study chemical engineering, which I did, and then joined Sasol in Sasolburg. And I remained with Sasol, a group of companies, for my entire working career, other than this last part, which reverted to consulting. Responsibilities obviously developed as I worked through the company, and I had a team in Rosebank and I had a team in Secunda. But fortunately, I was not requested to move from Sasolburg to other areas. So I've actually stayed in Sasolburg for many years.
Yuri, I was not that lucky to have a bursary from day one. Sasol didn't think I was that good when I stepped out of matric. But after my first year, I also got the Sasol bursary. So that makes the path to study so much easier. And I realize it's not lately. I hear with the new generation, it's better to jump from job to job, not to do the one thing at the one company. And I've been thinking about that. And I also realized that even though for a long time I stayed at one company, I didn't only do one thing though. Within the company, there were so many various areas that I could jump from one to another area. Did you experience the same?
Well, yes, I entered Sasol in the process development group, where we were fortunate enough to work on a very interesting project. It was the direct conversion of coal to fuels. It's a project that didn't last many years, but before it was cancelled because it was not nearly as economical as the normal project that Sasol runs by converting the coal to a gas phase and then from gas to liquids. But it was interesting. I spent 3 years doing that before I moved to the production department as a process engineer on the plant. Spent time at the Aggie plant, which is one of the coal to liquids facilities or Fischer-Tropsch facilities. Then moved to the Synthol area. And thereafter, I was requested to head up a project for the renewal of instrumentation in the Sasol complex. That was the one and only time where I carried the title of project manager. And I did that for about 3.5 years. Went back to production, but this time as an operations manager. Spent a total of 16 years in total in production. Moved to Sasol Technology, where I was asked to form a new group to look at all the environmental aspects and risk management aspects of new projects. And I started and headed the what we called environmental and risk engineering for a period of 14 years before I took early retirement and started with the consulting company.
Yeah, Yuri, I have so many questions about this
Oh,
journey. You gave it to me in 2 minutes, but it stretches over so many years. Um, I assume that project that you started off was in the R&D environment, that you say for 3 years you worked on direct coal to fuel project that didn't work.
no, it worked. It worked.
So it got cancelled. It got cancelled.
But it got cancelled because it wasn't totally economic.
Yeah. And Yuri, I've experienced the same in research and development. And we all know when we go into research and development that the chances of that project to go forth is not 100%. There is a small chance for these projects. So how did you handle 3 years of your life? Enjoying it, that I picked up from you as well, but it didn't go forward. How did you think about it? How did you manage that project not being cancelled?
Well, I mean, as you say, it's R&D. So you start with many different ideas. Some of them work, some of them don't. I was actually not formally part of the research department myself. I was in a department called process development.
Yes.
And we provided the process engineering service to our R&D colleagues. But I worked very closely with a pilot plant. We had a facility. It ran for many years. We produced very good quality liquid fuels. But it's in a reactor with three-phase flow. You sit with hydrogen being fed in, you sit with coal, and you sit with a catalyst in this reactor. So it's three-phase flow, high pressure, high temperature. If you go through valves and especially pressure letdown valves and so on, you have serious erosion problems, which was one of the main issues in the process.
I wanted to ask you, even though the project didn't carry on, what did you learn? And you've already answered that question. To learn how to handle three-phase flow, it's not something we ever really learn at university, how to handle three-phase flow. So that must have been a major learning curve, and I assume many other things that prepared you for your subsequent jobs that you went into.
Yeah, you're getting into an interesting area now. I graduated in chemical engineering, as I said, and obviously you feel as if you know it all. You've recently graduated, you've passed with good results, and everything is fine. And then you get asked to model three-phase flow in an upflow reactor. That was quite a blow to one's confidence, because at university you learn all about two-phase flow. Well, not all about two-phase flow. It was always, I hope they don't ask this in the exams because it's difficult. And now all of a sudden you have to deal with three-phase flow. But we did a couple of experiments on the plant and modeled it, and we had actually a model which fit the results very good at the end.
Yeah, Yuri, I was always humble. No, I told my daughter the other day as well that you do well at school and you almost get a chip on your shoulder, and then you go to varsity and all of a sudden you are humble. Then you learn how to do that. Often you might do well, and then you go to work, and that's a humbling experience. I had many of these humbling experiences in my life.
I can tell you, it definitely taught me that you don't know all, and there's a lot you can learn from your colleagues.
And Yuri, isn't it the same when you're not a manager yet and you're a junior engineer? So you're humbled intellectually with what you are learning, but then you think, oh, these managers, they are so bad and they don't know what you're doing until you become a manager. And that sometimes for me, it was also a very humbling experience, realizing maybe it's not that easy as I thought it was.
Yeah, it definitely isn't. I was fortunate. I had a number of extremely good managers in my time at Sasol. And even the last couple of years, whilst working at Erna Team Consultation, Several of my colleagues now used to be my line managers, and I can count them all as some of the better managers I've had previously. So it's actually an honor to work in the midst of such a group of people.
It's funny. At a stage when I left Sasol, I also had some amazing managers at Sasol, and there was a time when I said, I never, ever want to work with Sasol again, which is such a wrong attitude for one experience one would have. And now, I have so much respect for these are the best managers that gathered together at OTC. I respect them quite a lot. You said you became, it was once you had a title of being a project manager working on instrumentation project. Now, you're a process engineer working on an instrumentation installation process. How did that work?
Well, if you look at process control and you look at the teams responsible for process control work, you'll find that there are at least as many process engineers in there as there are electrical engineers, for instance. And it's quite a normal route for a process engineer to end up in such a field. But the focus was on managing the project. The focus was not on designing the processes, the process control systems themselves.
Absolutely. And to rely on their expertise, not needing to know everything about everything, but have a good enough understanding of what they are doing to make informed decisions.
Yes.
Brilliant. Anything else with your project management experience that is today helping you a lot in what you are doing?
Well, everything you do is really managing a project. If you do an extension at your house or lay out your garden or whatever, it's a project and you have to plan it thoroughly and you have to take it in stages and you have to figure out if you will be able to afford it and so on. So everything is a project. You don't have to carry the title of project manager before you can say you are a project manager. You whatever you do, you tackle as a project. The last 14 years at Sasol, although I wasn't a project manager, we were involved in all the different projects, handling the environmental and process safety side of it. So, yes, I mean, you're closely familiar with how a project is tackled at Sasol. You deal with the engineering managers, and you get to know the process intimately. So much so that when we had a quiet time in OTC, myself and two other colleagues decided to write a book on project management. The book is called Program Management for Owner Teams. And it's actually one of very few books on program management.
Yuri, it reminds me as well, there's such different levels of project management. The one is, as you said, a project in my house that might be a smaller type of project versus those big mega projects we had in Sasol, where we had an overall project manager and he had project managers reporting to him, looking at smaller parts. We get a program manager, that's the person managing a lot of many different projects within a portfolio. And then also in R&D introduced the thing at that stage where we talked about project coordination. That was a lighter level of project management, but those projects also had to be managed. You can't just have no goal to work towards, but you need to be adaptable and be able to handle the variability, more variability in R&D, less variability when there's loads of money at stake.
Yeah. Well, if at least when you implement a project and you know that the technology is proven, that's much easier than doing an R&D project where you want to prove the technology first.
Absolutely.
That's a different thing.
Yeah, so different approach within project management, depending on the project you're working on.
But whether you're a program director or program manager or project manager or project coordinator, you basically do the same thing. It's just logical thinking. It's a step-by-step approach. If you follow all the steps, you will get to your result.
Yeah, the underlying principles are similar, no?
Yeah, the underlying principles obviously similar, and there are no shortcuts. You have to go through the whole process.
You have to go through it all, but let's talk about the EIA, where I know you've been very much involved in. While I'm busy in R&D looking at my project, I don't go and start off a whole EIA investigation, though. Although it is important to look at an environmental aspect. What would your opinion be? When is the right time to do an EIA? And if it's not in the R&D phase, what is important in R&D to look at the environment?
Yeah, you can obviously not do an EIA whilst you're still developing your process. But what you can do is to focus on inherently safer processes. If there's a process that or a product that you can produce from several different starting materials, pick the one that is safer to handle for everybody, those in the plant, maybe final users. If you design an inherently safer project, you will end up with a cleaner and greener project at the end of the day, and probably also even a more economical project. Sometimes your alternative feed materials are more expensive, which does make it a more expensive final product to produce if you go that way. But in that case, you have to do the weigh up whether it's worth your while because of the inherent safety in the alternative process to spend more money on it. And normally you will find that it is.
Absolutely. If I'm not mistaken, you were part of the whole BD&I model development and Sasol, which is a stage gate type of process, especially around that. I was very much involved within R&D to look at the lighter stage gate process to do it. And I remember the one thing, if you have this brilliant idea in your head and you haven't done any research on it, at least get an MSDS and look at the material safety data sheet if there's nothing else.
That's a good place to start.
Is this but don't go and do an EIA, but at least look at that. And when you've done some research and you doubled, and as you say, look at inherent procedures. Am I going to blow a whole factory up? If I'm going to blow a factory up, make sure you put that in your capital expense, or try an alternative, or design for what you know is going to happen.
Yes. An EIA has its place, and an EIA needs to be done once you've basically finalized what you're going to implement as your project. You have your technologies available, you have the planning, you have the land identified, everything. So you cannot do an EIA beforehand. You can look at the impacts of the different chemicals you use, but you cannot do an EIA. And I mean, once you've identified a potential site, it's always good if you, and I know very few companies actually do this, but it's very good if you can do what is known as a strategic impact assessment. A strategic impact assessment tells you what the carrying capacity of the environment is to bring in additional chemicals, additional contaminants in that specific area.
Yeah, and to at least know the volumes that you need to know the chemicals that will come out of your process, so that you can really have a feel, how am I going to get rid of these things?
Well, I mean, getting rid of things, I don't know specifically what you're referring to, but obviously if you generate a lot of CO2, that's unwanted. So that's something that you need to consider very carefully. If there are processes which reduce CO2, production, rather go for that. One can look at alternatives to get rid of CO2 by CO2 applications, and there are some markets where CO2 is used, or carbon capture and storage, although there's very little real-life plants where carbon capture and storage really works effectively and efficiently.
But Yuri, I realize now we are very naughty. We are talking about things with acronyms, and not everyone who listened to this will know what we are talking about. So maybe just tell the audience, what is an EIA?
Oh, an EIA stands for Environmental Impact Assessment. I prefer to use the term ESIA, which stands for Environmental and Social Impact Assessment, because the two go together. If there's a likelihood of unwanted emissions entering the atmosphere, you want to know what the impact on your workers and the surrounding community would be. You want to know what benefits a project can bring to the surrounding communities. So environmental, social, they go together, and it's typically handled as one study. Well, and an EIA, or an environmental and social impact assessment, is not really one study. The process allows for the so-called interested and affected parties, people who are interested in your project and who may potentially be affected by it, to state what their concerns are, and the EIA practitioner then has to answer all these questions. So it typically involves into a whole range of different studies.
How many EIAs have you been involved in?
Oh, that is the most difficult question so far, but probably close to 80.
Sure.
And I've never done an EIA study myself. We managed the process, we managed the consultants, and we made sure that we got the right output. But you have to be a certified EIA practitioner before you can do this type of work. And I'm not, so we have to make use of certified consultants.
So Yuri, tell me about an interesting hobby that you have.
I have hobbies, and it's interesting to me. I don't know whether it would be interesting to other people. I enjoy music tremendously. I enjoy photography, and I have quite a workshop where I spend a significant amount of time doing things. Doing things that can range from knife making to other metalwork projects. If you make knives, you have to make a sheath for it. So I do some leather work as well, and plain old woodwork. I enjoy it.
Oh, Yuri, now gaan ons lekker praat. Now we are going to talk on fire. Yuri, music. Do you make music or listen to music?
I primarily listen to music. I bought a guitar at one stage because I wanted to play, but I found out very quickly that I don't have the required skills, or I don't have the ear for it.
Okay.
I have a very good ear when it comes to other people's music, but identifying notes is not that easy for me.
You know, I love people being able to play music. I also don't have that skill, although my sister-in-law tells me music is all mathematical, and she knows I love maths. But for some reason, my brain were not able to bring maths and music together.
Yeah, I use my mathematical skills for other purposes than making music.
And if I knew you made knives, I would have loved you to bring one together. If my son hears that, he's going to be on my neck to come and visit you and learn from you how to do that.
Yeah, I'm not a good person to learn from because it is early days and I've only made 10 or 12 knives. And I don't have the best tools for the job, but you can still make a knife with fairly basic tools.
Absolutely. No, that is very interesting. I need to come and visit your workshop one
Yeah,
day to see.
you're
I love
welcome.
the creativity that comes along with these things.
I used to love riding on my motorcycle, uh, but as the years have gone by, this is sort of less of a passion than it used to be.
Yeah, Yuri, I heard the rumors, and I would have asked you about that if you didn't mention your bicycle, your motorbike. How does a motorbike and being a risk specialist fit together? Because in my opinion, it's one of the most risky modes of transport out there.
Yeah, it probably is, especially on the South African roads and the condition they're in. Um, I tell myself that I stay down here in Sasolburg. It's a relatively quiet area, so it's okay to go for a spin on a Saturday afternoon when it's relatively quiet, or a Sunday morning when it's relatively quiet. I would also not like the idea of driving into town on a motorcycle to go to work every morning, that type of thing. I have done it, but I wouldn't recommend it to everybody.
I love the idea because often people, when they hear people are in risk management, they might have the preconceived idea that this person will never ever be able to take a risk. It is to eliminate all risks. But that is not what risk management is all about.
You can never eliminate all risks, but if you know what the risks are, um, you can account for that and make plans. I mean, when you started driving, they probably told you to always look for a way out. If something goes wrong, what can you do? Can you stop? Can you pull off the road or whatever? Um, if you drive on a ride around on a motorcycle, you have to think for the other person as well. If you see somebody waiting at a stop street to cross the road that you're driving on, um, you must think, what will I do if that person pulls out in front of me? Because many people don't see motorcycles. It's just not part of their field of vision type of thing. So you have to be careful. And I think that's what risk management is all about. Identify the risks up front and then take appropriate action.
Absolutely, Yuri. I've said the other day, I drive a lot on the N3 and people do not follow the rules. So even though I'm not in a motorcycle, I've realized driving my motor car, I also have to realize there's a risk that these people around me are not going to follow normal rules and I will have to adjust. But I get so upset, Yuri, if someone endangers me because they are taking risks and I'm trying to be risk averse.
Yeah, and you see that very often. But let me tell you this. I think a motorcycle is a beautiful thing. So I'd be quite happy to leave the bike in my garage and sit next to it every now and then and have a look at it and just admire the thing. I think a motorcycle is a thing of beauty.
Coming from a typical engineer, enjoying the engineering of this motorcycle. But talking about typical engineers, Yuri, I've been thinking about that. And for the audience, Yuri was not prepared for my questions. This is all as it comes. So, but I do want your first response. Engineers are very often portrayed as a stereotype. I don't think I fit into the stereotype, although there's aspects of my personality that fit into your typical stereotype engineer. Are you a stereotype engineer, or what is different to you than what we would typically see in the stereotype engineers out there?
Well, I don't think engineers fit into the category of stereotypes. First of all, there are many different branches of engineering, so at least there the different engineers differ. But I mean, some of us enjoy doing marketing and sales. Others enjoy doing detail engineering work. So there's no real thing such as an engineering stereotype.
But engineers are not good with people. Engineers are very good to sit behind their computer screens, not interact with everyone, and be all secluded in their corner doing their work.
Yeah, now you're talking about me. I enjoy that. I really enjoy working on my own, having a specific objective and working towards that objective. But I also enjoy the company of other people, of course. But I would not say that that's my best feature, interacting with potential clients and so on.
Oh, Yuri, I think I will disagree with you. I've been working with you on a team, and I really enjoyed working with you as a team member on a team. I think you have better personal interactions and management skills than the typical manager out there. But we can leave that argument for another day.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yuri, around the theme of leadership, who has had the biggest impact on your life as a leader?
Well, as I indicated right at the outset of this discussion, that I've had the opportunity to work with some great leaders. I don't really want to mention specific names, although I can highlight two people. Dr. Ari Geertsema was my first manager, and he was the man who taught me how to write a proper report and how to get all your information sorted out and presented in an understandable manner to other people. And he was a great man in that he took the time to listen to you. I mean, I was a very young engineer when I worked for him, and he took the time to listen to me, and he took what I said seriously. And if there was any recognition to be given, he was always very generous in his recognition and made sure that the right person got the due rewards.
Those type of managers are few and far in between, but they can have such a significant impact on someone's future and on their career. And what a humble thing. What a humble thing to give recognition and not take it. What a humble thing to listen to this young upstart and take them seriously.
Yeah. The other one was a gentleman called Elmo Marshall. He was a MD at Sasol One for many years. And he was one of the people who really challenged me. He called me in one Wednesday morning. At the time, the business unit I was in talks with a company in America for a possible joint venture. And he called me in and says, the manager of this other company is being difficult. He doesn't want to agree to the environmental conditions that we put on the deal. And I have to go and sort it out. This was Wednesday morning. That Sunday, I was in America talking to a group of consultants. We spent the next 2 days just talking about our approach. Had a discussion on the Wednesday and Thursday with this particular gentleman from the company, and we reached a deal. Wow. So that was a major challenge, and I'm glad to say that it worked out well.
Yuri, when you mentioned the word Elmo Marshall, or the name Elmo Marshall, I actually got a little bit emotional now. You know, when he retired, I'm way younger, but when he retired, my manager at that time recommended that I spend a few hours with Elmo as a mentor. And only 1 or 2 sessions I had with Elmore had such a profound impact. And I do tell the story now and then for others, but yes, definitely someone that I've also experienced as being one of those managers who are over themselves, who don't run their careers for them, who really care about people while getting the job done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no way being a good manager only looking at people and not to get the job done, but while getting the job done, to still do it in a humane way, managing people. And those type of people will stand out in my life as icons, actually, to carry on with.
Yeah.
What question must I ask you that I haven't asked you yet, Yuri?
Probably what's important in my life. And you've not asked me about my family at all. I've been very fortunate. I married the right person. And we've been together for over 40 years now, and I'm very proud of that. I am a true believer in the best thing a father can do for his children is to stay married to their mother. Now, I'm getting emotional now, which is not what I wanted to do.
Yuri, I'm also emotional now because my dad passed away recently, and him and my mother was married for 53 years. And I also think it's one of the best gifts that they could have given me as a child. So I hear you, and absolutely kudos to you and your wife. And I've met her, and I've seen that you guys are actually happy. You just didn't stay together for the sake of it. You're actually, you are happy together, and that is so beautiful to see.
Yes. And we have 2 beautiful children. My son, the youngest, gets married in 2 weeks' time. Well, on Saturday it will be 2 weeks, but it's close. No, on Saturday it will be 1 week, so
it's even closer.
It's even closer. Yeah. And my daughter is an accountant, and she works for Sasol.
Okay. The legacy carries on.
Yeah.
What is the one thing that you can tap yourself on the shoulder with parenting and saying, Hugh, that one thing? I know it's so easy as parents to think what we've done wrong, but what is the one thing that you think you've done right apart from staying happily married?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the kids give you mugs every Father's Day and say, best dad ever. I don't think there's a thing such as a best dad. I think some dads are better than others, of course, but nobody can take or claim the title to be best dad. 1 year I was given a mug that says, I love my dad, which to me is more important than being the best dad.
Oh, yeah, Yuri. I mean, my dad had a lot of mistakes, but he was the best dad that I could ever have had in my life. Oh, you know, we need to stop this now. All my makeup is going to wash away. Yuri, one more question. Unless there's another question you want me to ask.
No. This was the wrong way to go. So
no.
We're all losing our makeup, huh?
I hope your makeup isn't tough. This is authentic. Yuri, this is life. Life is tough. Life is not always easy. Yuri, one thing on risk management again, if we can go back to that, but I'll pause a little bit for Elsie to cut some of the others out.
It's looking like my knees off here. Hey?
With risk management, I'm thinking there must have been a project in the past or recently where you did a risk assessment and a whole risk meeting, and everyone is always like, oh, another meeting. But I'm sure there must have been a project where there would have been a major problem that would not have been identified in time unless one went through the steps to identify and put things in place. Is there any example that you can think of at the top of your head that you can share about, we didn't realize there would have been something, but sitting together as a team, going through all the triggers, we've picked things up that we could eliminate or mitigate?
Yeah, risk management is a painful process. It has to be done, and what typically kills a project or a business is what we refer to as black swan risks. Now, black swan risks are very low probability but high impact risks. Now, being low probability means that it's very easy to miss them. In fact, a black swan is formally defined as something that nobody could have foreseen. And people say that the COVID pandemic was a black swan event. It wasn't. There are many different medical scares every couple of years, and we've seen major pandemics every 50 years or so. So it's something that could have been foreseen. Nobody did, of course, and most governments totally overreacted when it hit us. But that's the fun part, trying to identify the so-called black swan risks.
And not overkill it. That's what I hear as well. No, it's to identify it, but then don't be so paranoid that you kill your project around it, but that you cleverly try to think, what is the best way to manage this?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a true black swan, you cannot think about it, and it probably will hit you very badly. Fortunately, on the projects we've been working on, especially the last number of years in OTC, there hasn't been one where something hit us totally out of the blue and said, this cannot be done, or we should stop the project now.
Yeah, but with all that experience around the table, there's more people who will already say, be careful, or already have inherently engineered some of the problems out. But when we are still junior engineers, we have such a limited understanding on how these things work together. It is so important to go through the thinking process and never be so confident that you think you've ticked all the boxes.
Yeah. You mentioned the BD&I model at the outset, the business development and implementation model. Part of that is the so-called stage gate approach to doing a project. And if you follow these guidelines, it's difficult to go wrong. It's difficult to go totally wrong. Yes, you have to identify your risks. Yes, you have to take appropriate actions. Even if it's a simple action like appointing somebody to be a backup project manager in case something happens to your number one project manager or whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's not so simple, but there are ways to overcome the risks.
Anything else from your side, Yuri?
No, I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. It was actually more fun than I imagined. And I enjoyed it. And I apologize for getting a bit emotional when talking about my family, but that happens.
No apologies. And one of the things Elmore Marshall has told me at a stage when I talked about getting emotional at work, a long story, but one of the things he said, Wilmien, never apologize for becoming emotional, because as women never want to cry as a professional person. He said, emotions show you care, and there's nothing wrong with showing that you care. So it's lovely to see that you are human, Yuri, and it's lovely to see that you care, and we will never apologize for caring.
Yeah, I don't really care because I'm of a sufficiently high age that I can say it's something that comes with age.
Oh dear, then I'm older than I think I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, Yuri, thank you. It was such a pleasure to spend this time with you. I can't believe the time has flown. It felt like a few seconds that we got together, and isn't that always the case when one really connects with someone and resonates with what they're talking? Thank you for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm very excited to talk to the next OTC member, the CEO of our company, Freek van Heerden. So look out for the next interview. All the best. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.